Chapter 6 Christmas 1940 HMS Nelson, care of GPO, Darling Molly. Monday, the 1st of July. Well, the promotions have come out and I've been passed over again. It's very silly of me, but I'm afraid I've let it depress me. I'm glad in a way because I'd as soon stop in the ship as anywhere, but I feel I must have got a very black mark against me somewhere, as it's almost a record for the commander of the fleet flagship not to be promoted after 2 years at the job. I put most of it down to S, who took every opportunity he could to blacken my name in the eyes of both Captain and Admiral. But still, in a way, I agree with him. I'm not good at this job, and I feel there are many more I could do better. A lot of old friends have been promoted, and I'm particularly glad to see Peter Pelly, Guy Morris, and St. John Terwitt amongst the commanders, and Abel Smith and Barry Moore amongst the captains, also Stevens. The whole thing doesn't seem to matter very much, but still I can't help feeling a bit depressed at present. I've no doubt the war will drive all other thoughts away soon. I wish I knew what was happening to you. These constant air raids on England and Germany are terribly stupid, aren't they? What earthly good can they do anyone? It's certainly a good lesson for those people who still think that war is a glorious thing and a fine thing. There can't surely be any glory in just pounding away at your enemy's civil population until one side's nerve gives away and both sides are ruined. Surely even the leaders of the totalitarian countries must see the senselessness of it all soon. If only we in the Navy could do something to help, but until they try to land, I'm afraid we can't. Well, perhaps I'd better not write any more today. I can't be helping to cheer you up much by writing like this. We'll see it through somehow. Tuesday, the 2nd of July. Well, darling, I'm feeling more cheerful about things now, although I don't like the sound of all these air raids in the British Channel area. I do hope little Jane hasn't been scared by them, and that you are not all getting sleepless nights. I suppose if it goes on, everyone will have to get used to getting their beauty sleep in the afternoons like we always do at sea. We always pack up work at sea, if possible, between midday and 4 p.m, as we all have very broken nights, even the commander. The reference to S as having blocked his promotion is interesting. I had always understood that it was Admiral Forbes who blocked the promotion against the recommendation of the captain. It seems unlikely that it was Captain Miles, whose report on Kenneth wasn't written until the 31st of December 1940, therefore long after the blocking of the first half of the year. So we might look to a previous captain for an adverse report, even though Kenneth had served under Captain Miles for at least a year when the promotion failed to come through. Kenneth's previous flimsy covering of the period from the 16th of August 1938 to the 18th of July 1939 was written by Captain W.T. Macon-Jones, and was also very good. He has conducted himself entirely to my satisfaction. An officer in whom I have the greatest confidence. He has carried out his duties as executive officer of the fleet flagship in an exceptionally zealous and capable manner. That doesn't sound like damning with faint praise either. Captain Macon-Jones apparently left Nelson in July 1939 to take command of the aircraft carrier HMS Courageous, which was sunk 2 months later with a loss of nearly half her complement, including the captain, over 500 men. Captain Miles joined in July 1939. The mystery which I hoped to resolve was who was S. Admiral Forbes transferred his flag to Rodney in January, but returned before the end of July, as Kenneth notes in a letter of the 27th of July. We have the C&C back again now, so that I am getting my 5 shillings a day once more, which should help to pay off the overdraft. This suggests that although the Admiral was out of the ship for half a year, he could still have an influence on promotions, aided by S. From the end of June until he left the Nelson, Kenneth wrote copiously to Molly, some 70 letters at the rate of almost one every other day, and nearly 40,000 words. Since he couldn't discuss anything that might offend the censor, and the ship wasn't operational for part of that time, the letters tend to be repetitive and somewhat gloomy. He refers frequently to old shipmates that he had met, and there are occasional games of golf or hockey to report, and progress with books that he has been reading, and always the weather. Typical of the early months in this letter, datelined HMS Nelson, care of GPO, Tuesday the 9th of July. Darling Molly, I had dinner with Geoffrey Cook last night. He is now captain of a big ship, and we talked old Petersfield days. It was rather fun. I think he has improved in old age. Not that he looks very old. He's worn rather well, really. He sent his kind regards to you and asked to be remembered to you. I also had a couple of hours ashore and a game of golf yesterday. In fact, it was rather a red-letter day. It sounds almost as though we still weren't taking this war seriously, doesn't it? But as a matter of fact, we are doing quite a lot of work and are getting efficient again, I hope. I'm hoping I may get a letter from you today. You usually write on Sunday, don't you? And the mail appears to be very good. Anyhow, I'm leaving this open till this evening in the hope of having some more news from you. Later. We haven't got the mail today, but I understand there is a big one in the vicinity, so I'll wait. I'm actually going ashore for a game of hockey now. What do you think of that? It sounds rather like fiddling while Rome burns, or finishing our game of bowls while the Armada approaches. But still, I dare say it's good for us. Actually, it's drizzling and rather miserable, and I don't much want to go. Later still. Well, the hockey was off because it was too wet, and I didn't get a letter from you, so it's not been a very good day after all. I heard from Violet, more cheerful than the last letter, but I suppose you can't expect anyone to be very full of good cheer these days, and in any case, all her letters, taking about 2 months, are so out of date by the time they arrive. It seems funny now talking about the Norwegian campaign. It all seems so long ago. It's almost a different existence. I dare say in a few weeks we shall look back on the quiet spell as a different existence too. I'm sorry this is such a depressing letter. There doesn't seem anything to say at all. I shall cheer up again as soon as I hear from you again. The main thing is, darling, that I love you and I'm just longing for you and the children, and for the time being we must just hope for the best. God bless you, treasure. All my love, Kenneth. The main interest in the letters, especially to Kenneth's family, is in the mirror which reflects, in a distorted and partial way, our comings and goings, especially the progress of us children, as reported by Molly in her equally frequent letters, which have not survived. Kenneth's comments on the news of the war and his predictions and judgments on world politics and his hopes for the future provide another distorting mirror to be eventually shattered by reality. In the first mirror we read, on the 11th of July, "Thank you so much for your letter. I'm sorry I wrote such a depressing one on Tuesday. As you know, I get like that sometimes. I don't think I show it, except by getting angry with people over little things. But if I try to write a letter on a black day, it's just bad luck on you. Your letters always put me right at once, though, and I'm feeling full of life again. The caravan sounds a great success. Let's hope by the time the bad weather comes you'll be back at Lumley Croft, because I don't think you'll find it quite so nice then. Nurse and Johnny come up during the daytime and feed with you there, do they? Or I suppose Johnny remains in the house if he's not in his pram. I'm so glad Jane doesn't seem worried by the air raids, because by all accounts you seem to be getting rather a lot of them your way. Portsmouth, I hear, hasn't had one at all yet. However, I expect everywhere in England they are having the warnings, and that is the most depressing part of it. Don't you get out of bed and go to shelters? Or aren't there any shelters? Johnny sounds marvellous. I'm so glad he's got a chin, even if it is a double one. Do you intend to go on calling him Johnny, or is that only while he's still a baby? Time will show, I suppose. Some of us still tended to think of him as Johnny, even until the end of his life. No, darling, I'm not at all worried or annoyed about not being promoted. That was merely momentary. Actually, I think it's a good thing, because I'd much rather stay where I am. I quite agree, it should be easy for us to keep our sense of values. Thank God this war is bound to be over sometime soon, and there's bound to be a lot left that's good. A lot of kindness and love and truth and loyalty. Of Christianity and civilization, in fact, and then we can start all over again thinking about the things that matter. Our lives even don't matter very much. They're very small things anyway. I think we've done our best, you and I, and we'll go on doing it as long as we're allowed. It'll be wonderful if we were allowed to continue our family life after this war. It's the only thing that really matters to me in my own existence. I mean, apart from the bigger general values. The caravan at Goblin Combe was Molly's home that summer. Jane and I slept in the Burns sitting room, which had earlier been converted into a sort of bedsit for a family called Homeyard, who had been bombed out in Bristol. I believe Mr. Homeyard, whom I picture sitting about, quiet as a mouse, wearing a hat, was a junior employee of Will's Tobacco, where Uncle Bill was chief engineer. Perhaps he was in shock, or overawed by the grandness of the Burn establishment. The family cannot have stayed long before the room became bedroom for Jane and Richard and me. The nurse was Dulcie's successor, Dorothy Cotter, Dodo. The same letter goes on to talk about the possibility of some or all of us going to America for the duration of the war. Kenneth was keen for us to escape the war, while secretly delighted that Molly was not trying her utmost to get there. I remember being not at all keen. Molly would certainly have seen any such move as desertion, and possibly would have been influenced by the recent loss of the liner Arandora Star, with many evacuees on board, though Kenneth was quick to point out that the chance of getting torpedo was only about 1 in 600. In the next letter, Kenneth supposes that Molly heard the wireless last night that evacuation of children to the Empire and the USA had been stopped because no escorts could be provided, and they didn't want a repetition of the Arandora Star. I presume that this has finally settled the matter as far as you are concerned. It evidently hadn't settled the matter at all. The next day, the 14th of July, he wrote, "I think every ship leaving these shores for America or Canada should be full of women and children," and, on the 17th, he had made arrangements for Molly to draw up £200 in case she found it possible to get away to America and wanted some money quickly. In the same letter, he thought it a great pity that the government had stopped the evacuation scheme, and, "I feel they have to get going again very soon, possibly in worse conditions, but it may, of course, be a means of rushing American public opinion into the war by persuading them to run convoys for our women and children." Next day, but in the same letter, there was more direct advice. "I should certainly let Jeremy continue at school as long as possible, and send him back next term too if you haven't gone to America. I feel it's essential for the children to carry on as nearly normal life as possible." There are further references to America in letters of 27th and 29th of July, and then silence on the subject until the 21st of August. I suppose you've heard no more about going to America, have you? Personally, I've rather veered to the side of thinking you're as well off in England for the present, and if Jeremy can go back to St Andrews next month, or whenever it is, then I should certainly recommend stopping. But that wasn't the end of the subject either, for on the 8th of September came a letter, whose purport I do not remember. I've just had a letter from my American girlfriend, the one I met in Venice hundreds of years ago. Why her letter has taken 6 weeks to come from New York I don't know, but I dare say it came via China and the Cape. Anyway, she had just got a letter I wrote her sometime in June, I suppose, in which I mentioned something about you and the children going out to America. She says she'd love to put you up at her people's place or at her brother-in-law's, both somewhere in Alabama. That's somewhere south, near Virginia, isn't it? Perhaps it would be easier if I sent you the letter, and then you could keep the address. What do you think about it, darling? In theory, I'm sure you ought to go. I should hate it, because if I did get some leave or a shore job, I should want you near. But of course, that is a thing which shouldn't carry any weight. I think I know what you'll say. But bear it in mind, darling, and if things do get difficult, or if I'm sent abroad, then I should go if I were you. I know they'd love to do something for us, and we needn't feel under any terrific obligation to them. After all, it's their war as much as ours, really, and finances at any rate will have to be pooled. Grace is an intelligent, artistic person, and I think you'd like her. Not that that's got anything to do with it. Actually, she's rather like Joyce Hollins, only a bit younger. There is a photo of Kenneth with a lady feeding pigeons in St. Mark's Square in September 1937. I assume this must have been Grace. Carefully prizing the photo free from the album, there is no inscription on the back, but a later letter identifies her as Grace Williams. The trip to America never happened, though Pippa, the Burns' younger daughter, was evacuated to the USA with her school. There are several more references to Johnny during August. Looking simply grand. On another occasion in his grown-up clothes. On the 22nd, to Molly, "Your little drawing of Johnny on his back is excellent. I think you should start a book of drawings like that. They'd be just as good as Dowd's. Is that his name? Or of those books you see of dogs and kittens." By the 2nd of September, Kenneth is supposing that Johnny can almost crawl by now, can he? 6 months is a great age. I do wish I could see him and you. Shall I run away and spend a weekend with you? I'm not really doing any good work here, and it wouldn't make the slightest difference if I went. In the next letter, on the 7th of September, "It sounds rather as though Johnny must disturb your afternoon's rests. Or are they so short now that they couldn't be disturbed? It's grand, anyhow, that he is always happy and seldom cries or grumbles. I'm glad the piano is ours at last. I hope we shall one day be able to use it. Have you heard if Emsworth or Westbourne have had any bombs in the vicinity? I hear that one wave of bombers unloaded their bombs into Langston Harbour by mistake for Portsmouth, so I suppose they might mistake our fields for our airport quite easily. Let me know any local news you hear, won't you? Because I get none from that part of the world." Jane and I also get frequent mentions. There is rather an arch joke in the 18th of July about finding a really nice flag lieutenant for Jane when the time comes, prompted by Duff's marriage to B. Pound, presumably Admiral Sir Dudley Pound's daughter, to his flag lieutenant. He was such a nice man, too. No, I don't think it's essential for the flag lieutenant to marry the daughter, but I suppose they must be very much thrown together, and it does often happen. Kenneth obviously thought the marriage a mistake, but the letter also indicates his anticipation of reaching flag rank, that is, becoming an admiral himself one day. At this point, he doesn't seem to be worrying about the missed promotion. Jane does seem to have been worried about something. She went away on a short holiday in Instow in North Devon after a whiny spasm. Uncle Bill insisted on paying for the holiday. Presumably Cousin Richard and Nurse went too. Whether it did Jane good doesn't seem to be recorded, but it evidently did Molly good. On the 25th of August, I'm glad you enjoyed your week without Nurse and Jane. I'm sure it's nice to have a change. I wonder if you'll continue feeding in the house now and not go back to the caravan. I should if I were you. It's a pity to wear yourself out with cooking. However, I know how you feel about being independent, and I dare say you're right. Don't go and wear yourself to a shadow, though. Jane's school report got a belated mention. I'm sorry she was so shy, poor lamb. I expect she'll get over that, though, especially if we can send her away to school some day. It must be grand having the swimming pool to amuse them both all the holidays. I'd love to fly over and have a look at you all. I hope the children don't walk over Phyllis's flower gardens. It's grand to hear that Johnny is starting to talk. I suppose as he can already say Mummy, he must have said Daddy weeks ago, and you didn't like to tell me because you were jealous. I shall write and ask Jeremy. Yes, I should think a little homework in writing would do Jeremy a lot of good. I wasn't surprised that his report said it was bad. It is good to hear that there was something that I wasn't good at, because other references to me are more flattering, not that there are many of them. On the 18th of August, Kenneth wrote, Did you see the letter Jeremy sent me? I think the picture of the dogfight is excellent. Jeremy would be most useful to us as an AA lookout, as I'm sure that half our lookouts don't know the different kinds of aircraft half as well as he does. I suppose knowing types of aircraft to boys these days is like knowing kinds of motor cars was 20 years ago. I love the snaps, and I'm sending 1 or 2 on to Violet. I think Jeremy looks so nice in them all. I'm afraid he rather overshadows Johnny. However, he looks very sweet too. I actually wasn't as good on aircraft as I was on warships, and I was quite hot on cars too. Our own Rover 14, 1934, was laid up during the war, but the Burns had 2 cars on the road for their war work. Uncle Bill's cream Alvis, which he had had very reluctantly though wisely painted in battleship grey for the duration, and Phyllis's Rover. There were 2 other cars off the road at Goblin Combe, Andrew's AC and Mary's Standard. Evidently Molly had been down to Lumley Croft and had had a stressful day, as reflected by Kenneth in the same letter. Darling Molly, what a perfectly rotten day you must have had on Monday. I suppose it was the nervous strain and worry and the disappointment at the thought of the gardener letting you down which made you ill. I get like that when things go wrong too, I'm afraid, except that I'm never sick. Poor darling, I'm sorry you had such a terrible time, and you could hardly have chosen a worse day, could you, in view of the air raids at Portsmouth and Southampton? I understand Portsmouth has suffered pretty badly in that raid. Anyhow, I'm jolly glad you went, and I expect you are too now. What a rotter old Lewis was, and it's very nice to know that Polly Hoxton, the Daily girl, who used to bring me cigarette cards from the many smokers in her family, can be trusted. Thank you so much for collecting my things at Lumley. I think I'd rather you kept them for the time being, but I'm very glad to know I can get hold of them when I want to. Don't bother to buy shirts or collars, but if you visit Lumley again, perhaps you'd collect some. And don't forget to get some of your nice clothes too. I may suddenly want you to come to London for the weekend. I should very much like to have the picture on board if you think you can send it without damage. That would keep me cheerful for a long time. I'm still eating the apples you sent me. Most of them are Worcester pearmains from the small tree in the corner of the lawn, at the edge of the yew hedge, and very nice they are too. On the 29th of August, Kenneth writes about Jane's emotional state again. Poor little Jane, she'll have a hard time in life if she doesn't get over this emotional state. Let's hope for her sake that it's only temporary. I expect Jeremy is rather like it too, really, only I suspect he's got much more strength of character and manages to fight it. Perhaps Jane will manage better when she's a bit older. I'd rather have children like that than mere animals, wouldn't you? It's much more likely that they'll be intelligent and interesting and useful citizens later on. If that is a good thing in these days, I'm not quite sure. Perhaps it would be better if we were mere animals. There are comments about visits to the dentist. Kenneth was surprised to hear that Jane liked having her teeth filled. Molly and I had no need of treatment on that occasion, though my recollection is that most times I needed at least one filling. I remember these visits as the worst dread of my young life. There were no local anaesthetics, and the drills were slow and almost always reached a point where the pain was unbearable, even if the cavity wasn't yet quite to the dentist's satisfaction. However, as I still have my own teeth at the age of 90, I am grateful for the early discipline of being taken to the dentist 3 times a year. On the 31st of August, Kenneth records having just come back to the ship after playing 20 holes of golf in the pouring rain, and I'm feeling marvellous after a hot bath and tea. And later, we are now getting filled up in this ship, and I suppose in all ships, with conscripts and some volunteers, all hostility-only ratings. I try to interview each one of them when they have been in the ship about a month to see how they are getting on. We get the most extraordinary mixture, but on the whole a better type than the active service rating, and all as keen as mustard. We've had 1 or 2 Cambridge and Oxford undergraduates amongst them, and the other day the Procurator Fiscal of Glasgow, a man of 39, arrived as an HO, hostilities only, ordinary seaman. He's the head government lawyer of the city and public prosecutor. Should be a great help to me if I get any difficult cases, but I hope he doesn't come before me as a defaulter. We've got about 150 of them now, lawyers, professors, farmers, bricklayers, grocers, clerks, shop assistants and factory hands, most of them from Yorkshire and Lancashire. A strange company. So a big change was about to occur. Having been out of action for about 9 months, Nelson was about to re-enter the war. Careless records that Nelson completed repairs in September and left Scapa with the Home Fleet on the 6th for Operation DF, whose purpose was to attack enemy shipping off the Norwegian coast. This return to action and the reality of possible consequences prompted Kenneth to write one of his more emotional letters. Saturday, the 7th of September. Dear darling, I feel like writing a rather sloppy letter. I hope you don't mind, but I think it would be just as well to get it off my chest. I suppose there is a chance that we may not see one another again. I hope it's a faint chance, but there's no denying the possibility, and it worries me dreadfully. Anyhow, in case that chance does come off, I do want you to know not only how very much I love you, and I think I really have learnt what love means in the last year or 2, but also to tell you how very much I appreciate all you've done as a wife, and naturally as a mother. I suppose there were times earlier on in our married life when I wasn't sure whether we'd done the right thing, and when I wasn't certain that I loved you enough, and I know you had many and stronger doubts. But for some time, and especially since the war began, I have been quite and irrevocably certain that I wouldn't have married anyone else in the wide world in preference to you, even if I had my chances all over again and the choice of the world. You've been marvellous, my dear, and you are marvellous, and I'd love to be able to tell you in person here and now all the nice things I think about you, despite all your early doubts, and for all I know your present doubts. You've been absolutely perfect in every way, and I sometimes feel a miserable little worm for all the nasty things I've said and done to you. On the whole, though, I think we've made a success of our marriage, don't you? Before this infernal war came along, we'd got to understand one another, and put up with one another's little foibles, and we had acquired a lovely house and a lovely family, and the only thing I want in this world now is to come back to you. I don't seem to have said very much, darling. It's not easy without sounding thoroughly silly, but do believe me when I say I live entirely for you now. I thank God daily that it is you and not anyone else that I married, and that I love now with everything I've got. God bless you, my sweetheart, and please keep yourself safe and sound so that I can go on living for you and loving you for many years to come. After this brief flurry of action and emotion, life at Scarpa seems to have returned very much to the previous pattern. On the 8th of September, he had had a letter from his Aunt Dorothy Whitmore, of whom he was very fond. She's given up sleeping in her top-storey flat at 94 Queensgate near the Albert Hall in London, and sleeps in a camp bed on the ground floor. It must make life very unpleasant in London these days, and I'm afraid they've really started bombing in earnest now, judging by today's news. I'm afraid they'll now bomb London day and night for some time and do real damage. I wonder if we shall reply by bombing their residential parts of Berlin. It's all so terrible and so stupid. Dorothy said that Phyllis had told her Jeremy was very quiet, and she wondered if he was worried by the war. I don't think he is, do you? I imagine it's only because he's always quiet with people he doesn't know very well, isn't that it? I should think he's less worried than Jane, although he probably thinks about it, and she just feels. Incidentally, I've paid next term's account, so you can send Jeremy back with a clear conscience. I think my overdraft is coming down a little now too, despite lack of dividends. 5 shillings a day extra does make quite a difference. I get an increase in pay in January too, when I've got 6 years in as a commander. I've given up hope of being promoted now. They sent me here young so as to get an early promotion, so if I'd done even reasonably well here, I should have got it last time or the time before. I can only assume that my face doesn't fit here. I only hope I shan't be kept on for many more years. 3 years should be enough for anyone in this job. We're still having ghastly weather, rain usually and gales consistently, and I haven't been ashore now for several days. However, life is very quiet and pleasant compared with most people's these days. On the 10th of September, Kenneth was glad to hear that Annabel's daughter, my cousin Fiona, had arrived safely. Annabel was the wife of Molly's brother Ted, who joined the Royal Marines from a job in the Bank of England, as I always understood it. Ted and Annabel visited us at Lumley Croft early in the war, before Ted was sadly killed on active service. Kenneth's letter continues. It's ripping that you've enjoyed having Jeremy at home so much. He'll get more and more fun for the next few years, I expect, and will be excellent company. I wish I could write letters to him. I find it terribly difficult, because I can't talk about what we're doing. When we do anything, and abstract things are no good, so it usually boils down to what he's doing. However, I suppose an envelope is the main thing, really. Yes, the golf here is a godsend, although the weather is still so vile that it's not often possible to play. Today we have another gale as usual, and can't land although the sun is shining from time to time. It is more or less the same for the sailors. They are allowed ashore every 4th day, and there are football grounds and a canteen, but the grounds are almost invariably unfit for play, and they merely go ashore for a glass of beer. I suppose we get an average of 60 to 100 ashore each fine day. How lovely to get the grapes from Lumley, and to know that the place is being looked after, not even any glass broken yet, I suppose, if the greenhouse is all right. I'd love to go and have a glimpse at it. I'm glad to hear about Johnny's anti-torpedo bulges too. I wonder how large he'll be before I see him. I suppose if we withstand the blitzing in London, I may possibly see you about Christmas time with a little luck. The reference to anti-torpedoing bulges was based on a comment of mine on seeing Johnny, a rather chubby figure on his back in the bath, slightly resembling the older battleships, which had external bulges on either beam to absorb the shock of any torpedo attack without damaging the main hull of the ship. On rejoining the fleet, Nelson also took on board the new Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Sir John Tovey. There were other changes too. 12th of September. Thank you so much for the golf jacket and trousers and enclosed washing which arrived safely a couple of days ago, together with an enormous Cheshire cheese from Uncle Willie. Not mixed. The golf jacket is excellent, although it is a woman's, and I wore it yesterday when it actually kept the rain out. We managed to get a game of golf yesterday in most unpleasant weather, but it was great fun and my golf is really getting quite good. I beat Lloyd, Story's relief, 7 and 6 playing level, and he's supposed to be 7 handicap. The trousers have shrunk so much at the cleaners that I could hardly get them on, and they looked absurdly short. However, that doesn't matter in the slightest, and it's nice to have more than one pair. There was still plenty of time for lengthy letters about the storage of Kenneth's full-dress uniform and cocked hat by Jeeves, about the golf club, a spoon, that he wanted Molly to buy for him, about books he was reading, My Pam, Grapes of Wrath, and the weather and the war. We've at last had a few fine days, 3 to be accurate, including today. It was glorious seeing some sun for a change, and grass and trees, and putting on greens like billiard tables. I think one of my ideas of heaven is a pleasant 4 at golf, with no hurry, in lovely surroundings and perfect weather. 2 or 3 rounds on the same day for preference, with curry for lunch and soft-boiled eggs for tea. Anyhow, yesterday afternoon was about as close to heaven as I can get at the moment. If this weather keeps up, and Hitler allows, I hope I may get another game or 2. I had to stay on board all today to let the captain have his chance. Did you listen to Winston Churchill a couple of days ago? He certainly seems convinced that the Germans intend invasion, doesn't he? Or perhaps he's just trying to make certain we don't relax. I suppose it is possible. I've always said Hitler wouldn't be such a fool, but it's the great disadvantage of dictatorship, of course, that you can't draw back or even hesitate. And he's advertised this invasion so much that perhaps he's got to try it. On the 16th of September, Kenneth floated the possibility of a brief meeting with Molly, and the question of evacuation to America came up again. I think there may be some chance of seeing you this weekend or next, but I'll send a wire if it's at all possible. So be prepared to pack a suitcase, won't you, and don't be disappointed if you hear nothing, because our movements are, needless to say, very liable to change at half an hour's notice. There'll be no night leave, of course, but it would be nice to see you again, even for a few minutes. If you can't come, don't worry, because of course you won't be able to wire a reply. Or rather, if you do, it'll probably take almost as long as a letter. Bill, in his letter, said, "What did I think about you going to America?" Well, I still think that if you can get a passage for the whole family and yourself, you really ought to go now that there's a good offer of a home. I should hate it, and I expect you would too, but I'm sure it's the right thing to do, and it would also be an unrivalled opportunity to see America, quite apart from all other consideration. However, I dare say you've already made up your mind one way or the other. If we get an opportunity of meeting, we can discuss it. Incidentally, if I do send a telegram, I'll mention a name place given in Bradshaw. I expect Bill will be able to help over it. Uncle Bill had reported that Johnny is a winner, or words to that effect. Next day it was, "Have you thought any more about going to America? Perhaps we'll be able to discuss it all next weekend. It seems a pity to disturb the children's education, and perhaps you can't get a passage. I can think of so many reasons against going, but they are all rather small and private reasons, and don't go to the kernel of the question at all." 2 days later, on the 20th of September, Kenneth wrote at greater length. "I'm so glad you appreciate Grace Williams's offer. If you can get passages, I think you ought to go. I should hate it, but we've been separated by more than the Atlantic before this. And after all, my next job might be a cruiser in the Pacific or Bermuda just as much as the Admiralty, and even if it was the Admiralty, I don't suppose I should see anything of you. Anyhow, I hope we shall be able to discuss it next week, and in the meantime do try and find out what passages, will you? I think the submarine danger should be discounted. The chances of your ship being torpedoed are only about 300 or 400 to 1, and ever then the majority of people are usually saved. In any case, it's no more dangerous than 6 months of bombing, even in a moderately safe area. I quite agree that you should take all the children, and I expect you could get some kind of schooling for them in Alabama, although how we pay for it I don't know. It would be an education for them in any case just to visit America and meet so many different people. I can well imagine that Jeremy was horrified at the thought of being left behind. I don't think he could bear that for a good many years yet. Thank you, darling, for saying you wouldn't change anything in your life except, of course, this war. I wish, too, that that was only a bad dream. But in any case, when it's all over, we shall be able to appreciate even more what is left to us, and it can't go on forever. I know that if you are safe in America, although I shall be miserable in a way, I shall know that a great part of myself is safe and not wasted whatever happens, and I shall really be much happier. I can't help feeling it must be much worse in England before we've finished, and if it isn't, and the Germans crack suddenly, then no harm has been done, and you'll merely have had a nice holiday. You're so brave and sensible about things when you're not with me, that I know you'll get on well out there and make your own lives. I'm not inferring that you're not all these things when you are with me. It's merely that, like all the best people, you improve with responsibility and rise to the occasion. The children would be happy too, and they wouldn't miss me. On Wednesday, the 25th of September, Molly's weekend trip to Scotland was becoming a definite probability, though nothing was certain until it happened. Just a note in case you don't manage to get here this weekend. I shall be bitterly disappointed if you can't, but I'll know you'll come if it's at all possible. I sent a telegram off on Monday morning, but have had no reply, so I sent another off this afternoon. I'm not trying to rush you, but I thought that perhaps, with the present slight disorganization, the first telegram might have gone astray. I've just had your Sunday letter, and I'm so glad you had such a successful trip to and from Pangbourne. You must have been jolly tired at the end of it all. Poor little Johnny, I hope his ear is quite all right now, especially if it's going to prevent you coming up here if it's not all right. I haven't been ashore for several days now, and I've been saving up for when you come up. I'm afraid we don't get very long hours ashore, but it'll be marvellous to see you for even a short time. How very naughty of you to start writing to me from 11 p.m. You should be fast asleep by that time. However, I should of course be furious if you didn't write. Are you really so busy? It'll do you a lot of good to come here for a few days and have absolutely nothing to do. The visit was reported by Kenneth in a letter to Violet, dated the 13th of October. Molly came up and saw me for a weekend about a fortnight ago. It was grand seeing her, although of course I only saw her for a few hours a day and couldn't spend the nights ashore. She seemed very well, although a bit thin, but that's rather natural for her. And to Molly on the 3rd of October. I do hope you had a good trip down on Tuesday night and yesterday. I'm longing to hear how it all went off, and if there really is a railway from Sheffield to Bristol. Also, what Phyllis and Bill and Nurse think of the Scottish project. I think you'll do the right thing if you go there, although having said that, I now quite expect to hear that you've decided to go to America, or Fiji. I've thought of one more thing of mine I'd like you to collect from Lumley if you go there, and that is my squash racket, new one. Would you mind sending that on here? Although it's not at all important, I know you'll have plenty to do and think about there. It was grand having you here for the weekend, even if it was rather short, and we didn't have much time ashore. I feel much better for it and happier to know that you are fit and well, although you must certainly put on some more weight. When I got back on board on Tuesday, I found a hamper of fruit waiting for me from Uncle Willie. grapefruit, oranges, apples, pears, plums, grapes, nuts, bananas, and a couple of peaches. Simply lovely fruit, all straight from Covent Garden. Wasn't it a marvellous present? And now, of course, I'm quite gorged with fruit. We went for our route march this morning, about 6 miles through some lovely grounds to the west, the opposite direction to the grounds we went through on Monday. I must take you there when you come for your next weekend. About this time Beckenham was bombed, and a stick of bombs fell across Elm Road, where Molly's parents were still living, at number 2. One bomb fell in the garden of their semi-detached neighbour, Mr. Dobble, whose house, number 4, was ruled unsafe and was later demolished. Although there was very little damage to number 2, our grandparents moved out temporarily to a hotel in Kingston-upon-Thames and later to Surbiton. The bombing of Elm Road is reflected in Kenneth's comments in the same letter of the 20th of September. "Your poor family, they must be having a really rotten time. Why don't they go and live at Lumley Croft if this goes on? That seems a fairly safe place at present, although they must have their quota of alarms, of course. I'm sorry you had such a rotten time in Bristol shopping, but the spoon and the goat coat were worth the trouble, I can assure you. It's a lovely spoon, and my golf gets better every day. God bless you, treasure. I must stop now, as I have occasionally got a thing or two to do. All my love, darling, to you and J and J." Kenneth's suggestion that Molly's parents move down to Lumley Croft had been agreed by the 7th of October. "I also heard from your father last night saying that they would most decidedly accept our offer of Lumley Croft. I was very surprised but delighted both for our sakes and theirs. There is of course to be no question of any payment in rent. I hope you'll make that quite clear if they should mention it. He said they were going down there on Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. I wonder if he has consulted your mother about it at all." By the 27th of November they were well settled in. "I had a letter from your father today. He seems to be enjoying Lumley and has great schemes for planting potatoes in the orchard, which he seems to be digging up already. I don't see that it can do any harm, and may be very useful as long as there is someone there to do the work. He also wants to pay all the rates and taxes. However, as I've just done that up to the end of March 1941, we can wait until then before we start arguing again." Our grandparents stayed at Lumley Croft until after we moved back there in 1944, when we did find much of the orchard dug up for potatoes. Subsequently, we took out many of the old apple trees, and Mother had the tennis court built with her wartime savings. This proved a great family asset socially. In the same letter of the 7th of October, another family move was mentioned for the first time. "I got your letter last night, and am so glad Phyllis and Bill approve of your scheme. I expect I shall very soon hear of you now up amongst the heather. Don't forget to take all your painting things." The scheme was for Molly and 2 other wives, Margot, wife of Commander Alan Campbell, whom my parents had known at least from Malta days, and Dorothy, wife of our family doctor Jimmy Rickett, to move up to Scotland to Rue Lodge, now Rue House, on the eastern shore of West Loch Tarbert in Kintyre. This was deep in Campbell country, and I believe the offer of the house came from some relative of Alan Campbell's. Jimmy Rickett joined the army and eventually found himself running a hospital for partisans on an island off the coast of German-occupied Yugoslavia. He later wrote an entertaining book about his experiences, which was later edited and published by his son John. He contracted tuberculosis, but recovered after the war and, I think, returned briefly to general practice in the Emsworth area. Kintyre would be quiet, away from bombing, and for Mother it had the great advantage that it would be more accessible for Kenneth should he get leave. The Ricketts had 3 children, Pippa, John and baby Barney, and the Campbells had Claire, so that with Jane and Johnny and a couple of nursemaids, the household was at least a dozen. Molly was very busy at this time, visiting Lumley, planning for her parents, and apparently getting machine-gunned in Lumley Lane, though she never spoke to me about this, while Kenneth was still playing golf and reading. On the 10th of October. My darling, thank you so much for your Sunday's letter and Jane's. I loved her spelling. I am go you to Nam Him Rover is especially good. I should think the question of the puppy could safely be left over until you get to Tarbert anyhow. Yes, I hope you manage to get to Lumley at the same time as your father and mother. It will be a great help to both of you. We have been for a long route march this morning, 2.5 hours solid walking, and I'm really feeling quite tired. I haven't been ashore much since you left, only once except for these weekly route marches. I have consulted the doctor about my periodical headaches. He is a nerve specialist and a psychoanalysis expert, and this sort of thing is his hobby. He got my life history out of me, and prodded and pinched me in various places, and looked into my eyes and made me do peculiar things. Apparently there is nothing much wrong, and it's merely a typical case of megrim or migraine. He's given me some pills which I understand make me sleep at nights and give my nerves a rest. I'm so glad Mrs. Rickett has confirmed that they can take you in Scotland all right. Be quick and get there because I want to be able to come and visit you. It's lucky you know the difference between this ship and the Rodney, so that you can tell if we ever arrive in the neighbourhood. I think the idea of Annabel and Fiona going down is excellent, and I'm thankful to think someone will use the coal we left and the eggs you so carefully put down. I shall like to know there's someone there too in case I ever go down south and want some of my clothes. I should hate to visit the house with you away, but it might be necessary. Yes, I heard Douglas, Dobble, has lost everything in the house at Elm Road. What rotten luck, isn't it? Still, it's better that it was his than his father's house, really. Douglas has lots of time to start over again. I remember a big tub of preserved eggs in a cupboard. I always understood that they were preserved in isinglass, a natural product, but it was more likely water glass, sodium silicate. The Dobbles' house, 4 Elm Road, had to be completely demolished and was replaced after the war by a smaller house. Eventually 2 Elm Road was sold to the Baptist Church, who had their office there. I'm sorry you had no success at the dance at the local pub. Perhaps you didn't use your Narcisse Noir. I should have thought you could have competed with Nurse anyhow, but perhaps, as you say, it's your natural standoffishness. Not everyone dare pick you up. Or perhaps they guessed your husband was of a furiously jealous nature. God bless you, my darling, and all my love, Kenneth. Then, on the 12th of October. Thank you so much for your letter from Lumley. It's a funny war, isn't it? Here am I, having been trained to fight the enemy for the last 20 years, and I do nothing but play golf, whilst you're being machine-gunned on the home front. Poor darling, I hope you weren't terribly frightened. Lumley Lane is frightening enough in the dark without having an enemy aircraft overhead machine-gunning you. In any case, I simply can't understand the mentality of a man who is about to crash to almost certain death, who goes and pours machine-gun bullets along a main road among civilians. I suppose it's the Nazi mentality of hatred. Anyhow, I'm so glad you've got down to Lumley and have had such excellent reports of the Argyllshire house, and have fixed up with your pa and ma about Lumley. The Scotch business sounds excellent. I hope I shall be able to spend some of Jeremy's next holiday with you. I've just had a long letter from Violet written at the end of August. She's full of sympathy and fear for us. It's a most peculiar situation. I almost dread to write and tell her that I played 36 holes of golf today and 36 holes yesterday. However, that's the truth. I've had a marvellous 2 days. Yesterday Commander E and I went ashore for a blood match, and we played 2 complete rounds and finished up all square on the 18th green in both matches. Today we had a 4-ball first, and then I, at least, managed to beat the Commander-E in the second match entirely because he couldn't putt to save his life. Anyhow, I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and the weather has been perfect for the last few days. I gather you've had reasonable weather too down south, so I hope you haven't had such a bad time at Lumley as you might have had. It would have been miserable if it had poured with rain as well as machine bullets. I'm longing to hear all about Lumley and the garden in due course, but I expect you had a thoroughly hectic time there shifting everything you had already packed. I hope you didn't go and strain yourself trying to move large packing cases about by yourself. I do wish I could have been there to help, although I'm sure I should have been more nuisance than it was worth. With Lumley Croft safely in the hands of her parents, Molly could concentrate on arranging to move up to Scotland. In the meantime, Kenneth went down with tonsillitis or something like that. Anyhow, a sore throat and a temperature. It started very slightly on Friday morning, but we had a busy day and I felt quite well, so did nothing about it. By Friday evening I had a temperature, but as Saturday was a busy day, I didn't go sick, but just went to bed before supper with some aspirin and got up on Sunday morning. However, by 2 p.m. Saturday, I couldn't hold out any longer and went to bed properly, and here I am. It's very sad, as I hoped to have had 18 holes of golf today, and the weather is quite decent for a change. Next day, Monday the 14th of October. Here I am still in bed, but feeling much better and sitting up and taking nourishment. What annoys me most is that it has selected these few days to produce some of the nicest weather of the autumn or winter or whatever it is, and I might have kept my tonsillitis for some nice gale later on. As it is, I lie in my bed and see a circle of lovely blue sky with nothing in it, but a bit of 6-inch turret and a couple of balloons and an occasional seagull. However, it's quite a pleasant rest, and I've missed all the panic of the change of the C&C. Not that there was anything in that except a handshake and a goodbye speech or two. We had the First Lord on board the day before, but I was there for that. Presumably this means that the visit of the First Lord was the Saturday and the change of C&C was the Sunday, but who was the First Lord? Normal usage would suggest that Kenneth meant the First Lord of the Admiralty, Mr. A.V. Alexander by this date, which is perhaps why he doesn't mention his name. If it had been the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, he would surely have used his name. The fact that Admiral Tovey had only just joined the ship a month after his appointment is interesting, but having joined, he lost no time in getting to know the ship's commander. The very next day, the 15th of October, Kenneth, who seems to have recovered remarkably rapidly from his tonsillitis, before the days of antibiotics of course, wrote, "I played squash yesterday evening with Geoffrey Palmer, and the exercise was so violent, and I was so unaccustomed to it, that I am quite worn out today. Stiff and tired. However, I don't suppose it'll last very long. I've had 2 letters from Jeremy during the last 3 days, one just a friendly note, and the other thanking me for a postal order I sent him for his birthday. It's grand getting letters from him, and he's certainly improved 100-fold since last term. He says they've had some airmen down there for a rest, who've been telling them all about bombing, which doesn't sound quite the thing for children. But I suppose they've got to get used to it. I also had rather a depressing letter from Dorothy. It must be terrible to have to spend day and night for weeks on end in an air raid shelter, which is more or less what she's doing. Later. I've been dragged ashore by the C&C for a game of golf since I started this letter, and am now feeling better, although I played execrable golf. I'm afraid this letter will have to be short too, because the mail has been closed already, and I've told them to wait half an hour for me. Despite this rather arbitrary exercise of his executive power, he continues, I've been discussing the question of my relief with the captain today. I and he both assume that I shall be relieved in the next month or 2. I do hope I shan't go to the Admiralty now, but if I'm not promoted, I should think it's highly probable. However, we can but wait and see. We must assume that the Admiral and the Captain are now on the case, and meanwhile Kenneth is excited by the idea that his family are about to move to Rue, which he imagines, on the 17th of October, as a large and lovely red house all covered in creeper and surrounded by park and woods, so I expect I shall be disillusioned. He also sees the possibility of Molly visiting him more easily when she is living in Scotland, or indeed of him getting some leave. If nothing else happens in the meantime to change everything, will you come and spend another weekend with me next month, say the 7th or 8th of November? Only tentatively. Anyhow, as soon as you get to Rue, please let me know how I can get there from Glasgow, will you? Either by flying, train, boat or bus. Because if I do get leave, no doubt it'll come very suddenly. At present I'm suffering from an attack of lumbago, brought on, I think, by the squash I played a few days ago. Today and yesterday I've hardly been able to sit down at all, and I have to get someone else to put my shoes and socks on for me. However, I don't think it'll last long, and I'm having some massage for it. The weather is nasty and damp and misty, which I think has a good deal to do with it. Molly has perhaps told him that his cousin Andrew Byrne, son of Phyllis and Bill, was in Scotland at Edinburgh University, preparatory going to OCTU, Officer Cadet Training Unit, and the same letter continues. I'll try and get in touch with Andrew, but it's not so easy because we're not allowed to mention where we are in letters or telephone. But I'll try and get a message to him from shore. 3 days later we hear, I'm sorry to hear you'll be more crowded at Rue and will have to work harder. I can see you'll have to have some sort of battleship organisation with a duty wife, a duty nurse, and so on. Perhaps the stand-in wife could look after the garden, and the stand-off wife go away and rest. Anyhow, I hope there'll be room for me if I get away for a week's leave, and I shan't have to share a camp bed with a couple of children and a nurse. I believe I suggested that you should come over and see me for the weekend of November the 8th. Well, come as soon as you can, won't you? I only suggested that date because I didn't think there was a hope of you managing it before then. I've no doubt I can get you a room at quite short notice now, and there's just as much or as little chance of our being present one weekend as another, or in the middle of the week for that matter. My dictionary tells me that migraine is a severe headache on one side of the head caused by congestion of the brain. Dr. Holford is an expert on these matters and tells me there's nothing radically wrong anyhow. My lumbago or sciatica or whatever it is doesn't appear to be reacting to treatment at the moment, but it's not terribly bad. It merely makes me worse tempered than usual. I'm not surprised Johnny can say mama. I should think Gelsenkirchen, or whatever it's called, will probably be his next word. Do you mean to tell me he can't say daddy yet? I don't believe you can be trying. Or is he going to be late in everything like Jane? It's funny how very wrong our children are according to Mary Stopes. I hope the rate of progressive slowing up doesn't continue, or else Johnny will take till he's about 10 years old and he'll never write. Talking about writing, I've had 3 letters now from Jeremy in about 10 days, partly due to his new fountain pen, I suppose. I'm afraid his postage account may be rather large if he goes on like this, especially if he puts 2.5 on letters to me. I'm so glad Jane and Richard get on so well together. Incidentally, I expect I've insulted Andrew for life, as I sent him a note today and called him Richard. I wrote it in a hurry before breakfast, and addressed it to Richard as well. Thank you so much for collecting some shirts and collars for me, and the hat. You didn't think of putting any of my things in packing cases for Rue, did you? I understand the war is likely to last another 6 years now, and things like overcoats might come in useful. Well, I must pack up now. I'm going ashore for a little exercise to see if that does my lumbago and temper any good. I haven't been for several days, and I think that may have something to do with my liver. From Andrew's own memoirs, I learnt that Nelson was at Rosyth at this time, which explains the phrase, come over, that is, across Scotland, rather than up to the north, from Kenneth's letter of October 25th. Andrew Byrne and a friend of his came on board to supper on Wednesday. They drove down in filthy weather on a motorbike, but seemed to have enjoyed it all right. I hope they got back safely. They are also coming to lunch on Sunday, Hitler permitting, so that they can have a look at the ship in daylight. They seem very keen on their job. It's strange to find people who still hope the war will be on long enough for them to be in it. I remember that so well in the last war, but rather stupidly thought that people had more sense nowadays. Anyhow, I don't think they need worry. It'll go on long enough all right. I wish we could be spirited away, just you and I and the children, and find ourselves on a lovely, peaceful world with no wars, don't you? And on the Monday, I had Andrew Byrne and his friend on board again yesterday. They came to lunch, and I spent all the afternoon, Sunday, showing them round the ship. It was most energetic, and we went from top to bottom and front to back. Needless to say, my lumbago is much better, although not quite cured. The end of October brought definite news of the move to Rue that Kenneth had been waiting for, as well as more news of the family and a minor unexpected treat. I've just had your letter saying that you hope to travel up on Tuesday night, so I hope you've safely arrived by now. You must have had a very tiring time, even if everything went according to schedule, which isn't likely with all these air raids about. However, I hope you'll all have a really peaceful time now and thoroughly enjoy the quiet. I hope the rain doesn't get you down. I'm glad to hear there'll be room for me, because I hope I shall get a little leave when I'm relieved, although of course it's never certain in wartime. If I don't get relieved in the next couple of months, I'm hoping to get a week's leave anyhow, but we can't rely on that, so come over as soon as you can and pay me a visit. Only let me know a few days beforehand. I think you'd better address letters care of GPO Edinburgh now that you're up north, although I don't believe they go to either Edinburgh or London, however you address them. I believe they all go to Liverpool or somewhere like that. Thank you for taking some of my clothes to Rue. I hope there'll be some use. Poor James, she sounds rather more mad than usual if she thinks she's going to Canada to find her soldier father. Is the war affecting her mentally, do you think? Because she's really ought to be a bit more forward at the age of 7, oughtn't she? Her letters are those of a child of about 5, surely. I'm sorry, darling. I think she's perfectly sweet, and I love you dearly. I didn't mean to be rude, and I'm sure I'm talking nonsense, really. It's probably because Jeremy was so forward that I've got the wrong ideas. What are you going to do about her school now? Let me know sometime all the arrangements at Tarbert, won't you? I had a great thrill on Monday night. Leonard and I went and had dinner ashore. We actually sat in a restaurant and listened to a band and watched people dance, and didn't get back to the ship till midnight. Hardly seems like wartime, does it? I wish you'd stayed up here, but come quickly. There's still a chance of repeating it, I hope. Would you like to bring little Jane over with you, or would that make it too difficult? Anyway, I hope I shall see both her and Johnny before the new year. With the beginning of November, Kenneth is musing. Another month of war over. I wonder how many more we shall go through. I'm afraid it's too late for you to come over for a weekend now, or even for a few days. Our pleasant time is at an end temporarily. However, I hope to get 7 days' leave starting about November 22nd. What do you think of that? In about 3 weeks' time only. It seems much too good to be true, and I should think it's more than likely that it won't come off. However, at the moment there is every chance that I may be with you at Rue on about November 23rd, so let me know how to reach you, won't you? I shall try and fly to Campbelltown, but that may not be possible, so let me know all methods, won't you? Except bus. I don't relish 10 hours in a bus. I'm so excited about it that this war business has almost faded out of my thoughts. Don't be so busy when I come home that you won't have any time to spare for me, will you? Perhaps we could go hiking in Argyllshire, or walk round the lochs to Arrochar or Loch Lomond. I'll be prepared for 10 or 15 miles a day anyhow, although I suppose I shall have to do it in uniform. Perhaps we can find enough walks in the district without being away for the night. Then I needn't be in a uniform the whole time. The war business may have almost faded out of his thoughts, and next day, the 3rd of November, he had managed to speak to Molly on the phone, which brought thoughts of leave even nearer. Darling, it was grand getting you on the phone yesterday. I'm sorry I was rather hurried when we did eventually get connected, but I'd been trying for about an hour, and when I did get through, I hadn't much time available. Actually, I was going to play golf, and had got there an hour before the others so as to try and get you. By the time we'd got a decent line, the others were on the first tee waiting. Actually, it started to rain just about then and came down in torrents which didn't stop till late in the evening, so that we only played a few holes in the end and got very wet doing that. However, having spoken to you and hearing that all was well, and that you apparently liked your new home, my day was made for me, and I didn't mind the rain. It rather reminded me of a day's golf I once had in Fangling, Hong Kong, the day after you had accepted me, or the day after I'd proposed, I can't remember which. Anyhow, I was playing with Commander Miles, and I remember I wanted to sing the whole time, or tell him all about it, neither of which I could do. Anyhow, I didn't mind what sort of golf I played, and even air shots would only have amused me. I'm sorry you can't come and see me, but the thought of a week's leave makes up for that, even if we do have to wait a little longer than I hope at the moment. Unless something untoward happens, I shall be with you some day between the 21st and the end of November, and hope for 7 days at home. I must stop now, as it's my only hope of getting this letter to you quickly. I'm longing for a letter from Rue. However, the war came sharply back into focus in the next few days. Careless has Nelson sailing from Scapa on the 6th, with her sister ship the Rodney in search for the German pocket battleship Admiral Scheer in the Iceland Faroes Passage. The Admiral Scheer was similar to the Admiral Graf Spee, scuttled in the River Plate after the Battle of that name, 13th of December 1939, against a trio of British cruisers, led by HMS Exeter, whose captain was F.S. Bell, and whose engineer-commander was Charles E. Sims. Sims was awarded the DSO for his part in the action. He, by his zeal and energy, brought his engines to full power in record time, and by his thorough knowledge of the ship and perfect organisation, checked the damage. His calm and cheerful manner set a fine example to his fellows. Philip Sims, son of Commander Sims, was a contemporary of mine at St Andrews. We tied for the Athletics Cup in the summer of 1944. Captain Bell appears later in Kenneth's story. The captains of all 3 cruisers were also awarded the DSO, for, as commanders of their ships, having done all they could in the long months of waiting to perfect their ships and ships' companies, so that they stood the test of battle when the day for action came, and heartened all by their readiness, example, and encouragement. These awards may be the origin of my father's observation that he was the first commander of a ship damaged by enemy action in World War II, not to get the DSO. This seems to me a little disingenuous, as the captains of the other 2 light cruisers only held the rank of commander, while Kenneth, in Nelson, although he held the same rank, wasn't the ship's captain. This may seem very confusing to us, but not so in 1939. In any case, one has to admit the instantaneous damage from the mine in Loch Ewe was on a very different scale from the damage to Exeter during the long battle of the River Plate, which forced the Exeter to withdraw. The Graf Spee was a vastly more powerful force than the 3 lightly armoured cruisers, whereas if Nelson and Rodney had come up against the Admiral Scheer, the advantage would have been the other way. The German ship was probably only about 12,000 tons fully loaded, about 1/3 the displacement of Nelson, and her main armament was 6 11-inch guns compared with the Nelson's 9 16-inch guns. This would give the weight of broadside from Nelson at about 5 times that of the Scheer by my calculation. However, a lot would also depend on the effective speed and armour of the two ships. The Scheer was nearly 8 years younger than Nelson, and according to Jane's fighting ships of World War II, 1989, had diesel engines generating 54,000 horsepower, compared with the British ships' steam turbines generating only 45,000 horsepower. This gave Scheer an estimated 3 knots speed advantage, 26 against 23. However, Nelson and Rodney didn't find the Scheer, and Nelson returned to Scapa on the 13th of November. Kenneth hadn't stopped writing even while at sea, hoping for leave and wondering about his relief. 8th of November. I'm still hoping to come on leave about the 20th, but it's very much on the knees of the gods, or should it be in the laps of. It's a marvellous thought and brings new life to the old chap. I still haven't heard what my relief is due, but the captain expects to hear any day now. If he comes early in December, then I shall have to postpone my leave till after I've been relieved. But personally, I think they'll want to see who gets promoted, so that they can have some idea of my next job amongst all the changes. And on the 12th of November, in the same letter as above, but obviously not posted while at sea, and perhaps deliberately nonchalant to avoid giving away the fact that they had been on an active operation. Even longer between letters, I'm afraid, and unfortunately it doesn't mean that I've got any more news, so it'll only be a short letter anyway. Days seem to roll by, but they are all very much alike. We've had a weekend, an Armistice Day, since I started this letter, but it makes no difference as far as we're concerned whether it's Christmas or Easter. Thank goodness we've done away with Armistice celebrations and the 2-minute silence. That's one good thing this war has done. We had our poppies, and otherwise it might have been any other day on the calendar. I imagine it's much the same with you too, and I'm longing to hear what it's like at Rue, and what you do there. If I don't get my leave, you must send me a sketch of the place, or at any rate of the house and grounds, so that I can visualize it. Talking about leave, I still may manage my week, and possibly starting this weekend. I shall probably telephone or telegraph and ask you to meet me in Glasgow, and we'll have a night's celebration there together before taking the morning boat to Tarbert. I think the Central Line Hotel is the place to stay at in Glasgow, but I'll let you know where to meet me. Won't it be marvellous? I finished reading The Scarlet Impostor, and am now in the middle of an even worse thriller, American Gangster Stuff by Peter Cheney. A wonderful mental relaxation. What do you think of the Greeks and our RAF success? We seem to be doing pretty well at the moment, but I've no doubt that there are a lot of setbacks to come yet. We haven't seen the next German move yet, and that's what's going to count. I'm afraid it may come after this visit of Molotov to Germany. Also, I wouldn't put it past the Italians to use gas in Greece soon, if they can't get their way otherwise. What skunks the Italians are proving. Abyssinia, Albania, the stab in the back to France which they hail as a victory, and now inoffensive Greece. However, they've lost a lot of prestige lately, and unless Germany come to their support, they may lose much more. However, let's have that week's leave and we'll forget the war. Italy had taken opportunistic advantage of the imminent collapse of France to enter the war on the German side in June. They attacked Greece on the 15th of October and were initially strongly resisted in the mountains by Greek forces until Germany was forced to send troops to stiffen the Italians. On return to Scapa, Kenneth found 3 letters from Molly waiting, dated the 31st of October and the 3rd and 6th of November, which brought him up to date with the move to Rue and the news from Lumley Croft, and on the 14th of November his leave was clearly imminent. I'm still hoping for this leave, and it may even be a bit earlier than I expected. In fact, I shall probably be with you on Monday or Tuesday, before this letter gets to you, I expect. I shall have 7 days at home and will certainly bring an old pair of shoes and some spare socks, but don't expect too much of me in the walking line, will you? It would be rather fun if Jimmy and Alan were there too. Will the house really hold us all? I'm so glad everything seems so good at Rue, and I do hope you'll all be happy there. I shouldn't worry about the financial side of it. I expect that'll settle itself in the end. Poor Jane. It's most unfortunate that she's not very good at journeys. You didn't say how Jonathan had stood it all, so I suppose he's in the pink as usual. How sickening that Lumley had been broken into, but I'm glad we've got Mr. Reynolds about the place still, and the boys don't seem to have done much serious damage. How long do you think your pa and ma are going to stay there? I hope they'll make good use of the eggs and coal anyhow. I'm sorry Annabel has had to leave. Yes, I will certainly get your canvases, as I am bound to pass through Glasgow, I suppose, and I can't imagine that I'm likely to arrive there at the right time in the morning to catch the train to Weymouth Bay. I rather hope to get there in the evening, and get you to meet me for a night on the tiles, but I doubt if I shall be able to let you know in time when I'm coming. Isn't the news from Taranto grand? There were a lot of old Eagle friends implicated, Russell and Williamson, etc. At least I expect they were. Why on earth does Jimmy Rickett want to join the army? I'm sure he's doing much better work as a civilian doctor. He'll find life very much of a waste of time in the army, I'm afraid. Like our doctors, they probably have nothing whatsoever to do for about 360 days in the year, and a frightful rush about once a year when there's a battle or an explosion or something like that. We don't want an enormous army anyhow. I wish they'd demobilise half our present army as it is, unless they intend sending them all to Egypt or somewhere, and I don't suppose they've got the equipment for that. Why on earth doesn't Joyce move down to Lumley Croft if she's so miserable in Wales? I can't believe it's really as bad as that anyhow. Or is she finding John rather trying? It must be great fun for the children at Rue, and in the summer it'll be heavenly, I should think. I'm longing to see it all. Joyce Ransford, Molly's sister, we have met before. She went with her daughters to Tenby at this stage of the war. The other event mentioned in this long letter reflecting Molly's news is the break-in at Lumley, and the role of the excellent P.C. Reynolds, the Westbourne policeman. He was keeping an eye on our house while it was empty, which entailed cycling about half a mile from the village. On finding a broken window, he immediately suspected the kids living in the cottages a further quarter-mile away, and recovered much of the stolen property, which in truth was mostly toys of mine. The only items he failed to recover, not knowing of their existence, were a commemorative crown, 5-shilling coin, 25p in current money, of George V's Silver Jubilee in 1935, and a commemorative medal of George VI's coronation in 1937. Mr. Reynolds was also called up at some point, but returned to police service after the war, and was last seen as a police sergeant directing traffic round the cross in the centre of Chichester, before the post-war pedestrianisation. It is amazing to think how different policing was in rural West Sussex, or indeed in the city of Chichester in 1940 from how it is today. This is a long diversion from Kenneth, for whom events must have moved very fast soon after posting that letter. He evidently got his leave and saw Rue for the first time. On the 27th of November, his next letter confirms his return to Nelson, and presumably Scarpa. Darling Molly, I have safely arrived back according to schedule. I only had an hour in Glasgow, during which I had some supper, and I arrived at Donnybee. This word is difficult to read in the original. It must be the air base from which he returned to Scarpa. At about 9 p.m, where I found Andrew waiting for me. I spent a very comfortable night there, and the aircraft left punctually at 9:30 this morning in perfect weather. The view over the tops of the mountains was lovely at times, but damned cold. They were covered in snow, and after about an hour's flying, we got into poor weather, which got gradually worse until we landed just before noon. I must say it's no better now. It's rather trying being back, but I must say I feel much better for my leave and ready to carry on the struggle once more. It was grand finding you all well and in such a pleasant safe spot. Long may it last, without any internal interruptions. I don't really see why it shouldn't work all right, at any rate as long as the war lasts. Kenneth's next letter is more than a week later, the 5th of December, and he has evidently been ill in the interval, but there is good news on 2 fronts. Up and about again and back to duty, although only light duty, whatever that may be. Anyhow, I stick to my cabin most of the time and feel a bit weak. I've met the new C&C and Chief of Staff, and both of them seem very charming. It'll be grand to have a cheerful man at the top again. The last one may have felt cheerful enough, but on the few occasions when he allowed anyone to see him except his own personal staff, he seemed to have a perpetual grouse. In fact, he was rather like an old brown grouse, creeping about in his native heather, I think. Not what you'd call a born leader of men exactly. However, he's gone now, and I must say I feel a great personal relief. I feel he's probably done me down completely and managed to stop my promotion, so perhaps that's why I feel a little bitter against him. Kenneth's health has improved, and he has met Sir John Tovey, and the omens are good for a new job, though there doesn't seem to be any definite news of a relief. He has also been shopping. I managed to get a few Christmas presents for the children the other day, and have sent them off, but hope you won't open them till the proper day. The stupid rubber thing for Jonathan is really from the Padre. I think it's rather a waste of money, but it was very kind of him to think of it, and he did my shopping for me. Jane's is just something to employ her fingers for a little while. I have also sent an Indian's wigwam off to Richard Byrne, as I thought we owed them rather a largish present, and I don't think I can get the toffees for Phyllis. I have ordered a book for you called With Malice Towards Some. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read, and in places made me laugh out loud even lying in bed, and you know how I hate reading in bed. I thought of giving it to your mother as a Christmas present, but daren't because I thought she would probably think I was getting at her. Perhaps you can give it to her. I've got a watch for Jeremy. They are terribly expensive these days, and I am having it regulated at present and will send it off in a day or 2. We're having our arts and crafts exhibition this weekend, but I'm afraid there's not nearly the enthusiasm there was 12 months ago. Then, of course, we'd had 4 solid months at sea and Scarpa, and this year we've had rather more opportunities for other forms of relaxation, even some shore going. I don't remember that watch, but I do remember it arriving when I was ill at school. It was the origin of the Barley Colonel story, which my children used to demand with, "Tell us a story about when you were a little boy." The story goes that one day when I was in the sick wing at St. Andrews, we had barley kernels for lunch. There was very little rice to be had, and we all hated sago and tapioca, and, as it turned out, I found the unusual alternative of barley kernels equally unpalatable. What to do? I think there was only one other boy in the sick room with me, so I packed the barley kernels into the slim cardboard box in which the watch had arrived and threw it from the upper floor window into the shrubbery across the terrace outside the gym. It was a difficult shot, back-handed with the right arm to avoid the half-open casement window, and though my line was good, the elevation was poor, and the box fell in the middle of the terrace, spilling the unspeakable barley kernels in a neat but obvious heap. I was horrified and feared punishment. The box may have my name on it. The mess was unmistakable, but no one ever mentioned the incident, even to chide me for wasting food in wartime, a hideous crime. By the 8th of December, Kenneth is taking an interest in Nelson's business again, as well as in Lumley Croft and Molly's mother heading to Rue for a visit. He evidently now has definite information on his departure from the ship, which perhaps he had been told earlier and had passed on to Molly during their time together at Rue. I'm so glad all goes well and hope your mother will make it all right. Who's going to look after Pa while she's away? I'm glad he's finding himself so busy down there that he can't tear himself away. Perhaps it may mean that he'll forget his intense desire to work and will settle down there for the rest of the war. 6 years, I'm told now. I'm very much better and have been on the upper deck for the first time today, so I really am back to duty again. People tell me I look like a ghost walking about. But I usually look pretty deathly anyhow, so that doesn't worry me over much. I've been reading a lot again lately, having not had so much running about to do, and I'm enjoying it immensely. I've almost forgotten how to read a decent book. Yesterday and today I read Disraeli by André Marois and loved it, and the day before I read an interesting short novel by Rebecca West. Now I'm starting All Men Are Enemies by Addington, which is supposed to be very good, but looks as though it'll take a long time to read. We had our arts and crafts exhibition yesterday and today, and it's been a great success. Not so many entries as last year, I don't think, but some very good ones, and a terrific enthusiasm to see the exhibition. Queues all days long, almost. I'm glad to hear Watcham likes an interest taken in his kitchen garden. Perhaps I can find some hours' employment there if I get any leave in January. I'm going to ask for a month's unemployed time before my next job, but it's rather doubtful if I can get it, although the doctor has promised to back me up. He doesn't seem to think I shall get over these headaches unless I can relax, and he tells me, which I know is quite true, that I'm quite incapable of relaxing. The trouble is, I think, that I haven't relaxed for a single day for the last 4 years. My leaves come from the ship, have always been broken up by one thing or another, and in any case I've always been worrying about the ship. It didn't matter much for the first 2 years, but I think I really worked myself up to rather a pitch by September this year, and when I wasn't relieved, the anticlimax was too much. I certainly haven't enjoyed my work at all since then, and I shan't again until I get a new job. However, life is very much more pleasant under the new regime, and I can stick another month. Watcham must have been the gardener at Rue, though I don't remember the name. The Mears family lived nearby, and Mrs. Mears was one of the daily staff at Rue, cook, I think. Her son Colin was about my own age, but I didn't get to know him in my school days, though I think I secretly would have liked to. Another daily was a Mrs. McNay, who had the habit, perhaps very wise, of taking her teeth out before getting down into scrubbing floors. Mother wrote a short poem about this one day when the good lady failed to turn up for work on time. Scotsway, where's our McNay? Go search by burn and bracken. Go drag the loch wi' fish nets, frae Tabat doon la clacken. Will she no come back again? Och aye, of course she will. Her dentures on the draining board are smiling at us still. I was told that during that very hard winter the roads were impassable and groceries were delivered from Tarbert by boat. 2 more letters from Kenneth reflect my grandmother's visit, apparently after a typical wartime train journey, and also my first school holiday at Rue. 11th of December. I had a slight relapse on Monday and was confined to my cabin all yesterday, but I'm very much better again now, and as the sun is shining, I've been about on the upper deck again. It's really rather a lovely day, with hardly a cloud in the sky, and all the hills covered with snow. If it keeps up, I shall have to go ashore one day. I haven't managed to leave the ship at all since I came back from leave. I had another letter from Dorothy yesterday. She said they'd called for volunteers to go and help with the air raid and shelter problems in Southampton, and as there'd been a bit of a lull in London, she had volunteered to go. I think she deserves a GM or OBE or something like that, don't you? I think it's a good thing you couldn't get your mother to bring up Jeremy. I'd like him to stay till the end of term if possible, because I'm sure he gets good value out of it, even if he isn't doing lessons. I hope Dorothy will be able to bring him up. I wouldn't dream of taking him away from school just because they bomb Reading, if they ever do. The Germans aren't quite such bad shots as that, and if they hit St Andrews, they're just as likely to hit anywhere else he may go, or even Rue. I think personally that the Germans are relying on their submarines now to starve us out, and are only using their bombers on military objectives to hinder our armament works as much as possible, hence Coventry, Bristol, Southampton, Birmingham, etc. I don't suppose their bombing is much more promiscuous than ours, if at all, with the exception of their attacks on London, of course, which were aimed at dislocation and demoralisation of the capital and have failed. I hope your mother is enjoying her visit. I'm sure she is. It must be a great relief to get away from all the noise and the danger too, and to be able to sleep in peace with fairly good chances of a quiet night. Your father says he doesn't mind it, but he must tell on people's nerves in the long run, surely. I should imagine he knows all about wireworms, and there's certainly plenty in the orchard. I've no doubt he'll make a marvellous job of it if he does really remain there. Nellie Weeks says Emsworth is a great rest after London, so it can't be too bad. I'm so glad you're finding some jobs in the kitchen garden. You'd better get the gardener ready with lots for me to do. I feel a month of gardening with 12 hours in bed every night and nothing at all to worry about is just what I need at present. Although I fully realise I don't deserve it nearly as much as about 80% of the people in England, or as much as most other naval officers for that matter. The people in the Mediterranean, sea, air and land, seem to have sprung into life lately, don't they? I hope we can keep up the pressure. I'd like you to read Faraby's article in the December 19th Century, which I'm just sending you. Like all his articles, I think it's excellent. He always seems to say exactly what I've been thinking. I'm not sure whether he'd considered that as a compliment. 15th of December. Darling Molly, I'm glad you managed to fix up with Jimmy to collect Jay. It must have been very worrying, and how silly of Do to try and get you to arrange it all from so many hundreds of miles away. I thought they had arranged to call for him en route to London. What a pity your mother had such an unfortunate day to arrive on. However, I suppose the cessation of gunfire and bombing made up for the other discomforts. You don't say how she left Lumley or father, but I suppose that means they are both all right. We've been having gales too, plenty of them, but also a couple of lovely fine days early last week. I haven't, however, been ashore yet, although my tonsillitis and other ailments appear to have answered to treatment, or to lack of it, whichever you like. Anyhow, I'm feeling fit again now and ready to withstand the remaining week or two of my term. I've heard no more of my relief, except that he has been relieved from his last job, so is presumably waiting on leave now. Thank you very much for sending on my washing. It hasn't arrived yet, but no doubt will in due course. Snapshots of my journey from Emsworth to Rue remain with me. I don't remember how I got from Pangbourne to Emsworth, or whether I was staying at Lumley Croft or the Ricketts house in Tower Street. But I do remember a late-night start in the Ricketts car from their back gate that opened onto the square in Emsworth, and the drive up to London with me wrapped up in the back seat. The magnificent booking hall at Euston Station, demolished decades ago, the overnight stay at the Central Hotel in Glasgow, and supper in bed with soup and Melba toast. Finally, the ferry journey from Weymouth Bay to Tarbet, through the Isles of Bute. Back aboard HMS Nelson, their lordships' plans for Commander Atkinson were being revealed at last. Kenneth's letter of Tuesday, the 17th of December. Darling Molly, some really exciting news. I'm being relieved in a few days' time, and I'm going to a job I think I shall really like at the Admiralty, Plans Division. I don't yet know who I'm relieving or the exact nature of the job, but I'm told it's a very good one. Anyhow, I'm very thrilled at the moment, although no doubt in a couple of months' time I shall be longing to get back to sea again. There's one unfortunate snag, and that is that I get no leave at all. I leave here on Monday and go straight down to London, reporting on Christmas Eve. It sounds ghastly, arriving in London on the evening of the 24th with nowhere to go, all my luggage and probably an air raid. So think of me on Christmas Day, won't you? I've no doubt I shall get over it somehow. At present I propose going to the club and trying to put up there for the first night or two, and then joining Dorothy in her flat, 94 Queen's Gate. But I understand the club has been bombed, and presume Dorothy is out of town for Christmas, so things may not go exactly according to plan. For the moment, will you write to me at the United Service Club, Pall Mall, Southwest 1, telephone Whitehall 7711, and telegrams Line Dock, Picky, London. It's miserable not getting any leave, and I don't suppose there's a hope of getting away for many months to come now, but I hope you'll brave the air raids and come and spend some time in London with me as soon as you can. Perhaps when you bring Jeremy down to school again. I don't think I can really share Dee's flat for good, and shall look around and see if I can get somewhere where you can come and stay with me, but I shall know more about it in a week or two. The doctor, as I told you, proposed to recommend me for 3 weeks or a month's sick leave when I left here, but I'm afraid I can't possibly let him do that now, or I should miss this job and probably get something much worse later on. In any case, I think I shall be really interested now, and that's the main thing. It's really because I've been depressed about this job that I've not been fit lately. I can feel myself recovering mentally already. I am enclosing a few half-fare vouchers for you to come backwards and forwards to visit me, and also for taking Jeremy to and fro. I am also sending you, under separate cover, your 2 oil paintings of the house. I'd like to keep them with me, but don't think I can very well hang them at the Admiralty. Will you keep them for me? And if and when I next go to sea, I shall most certainly want them again for my cabin. I am sending a packing case with my clothes, things I shan't require at the Admiralty, to Lumley Croft, and it will be handier there than in Argyle, if I have to make a pierhead jump for the ship one day. I will write to Father and ask if he'll look after it for me, with all the other gear. Well, darling, it's all so sudden when it does come, isn't it? And I shall be much too busy for the next week or two to be really upset at missing you all at Christmas and the New Year. But I'll be thinking of you all the time, and I hope you have a marvellous time with all the children, and perhaps with Alan and Jimmy too, lucky devils. Anyhow, darling, there's one consolation. We shall presumably be in the same country as one another for the next year, and you needn't worry about me being torpedoed in mid-Atlantic. I shall merely be being bombed like the rest of the population, and I understand the underground accommodation at the Admiralty is excellent. God bless you, my treasure, and all my love to you and the children, and all of you have a very happy Christmas. Kenneth. Kenneth's last letter from Nelson was dated 5 days later, Sunday the 22nd of November, the unusually long gap being explained. Thank you so much for 2 lovely letters which I got yesterday and the day before, and will you please thank Jeremy for the one I got from him. I shan't be able to write to him and Jane today, I'm afraid, as I'm terribly rushed, so will you give them my love and best wishes for Christmas, and I'll write them both individual letters as soon as I get settled down the other end. The last few days have been one hectic rush. We had a trip to sea which didn't help, and didn't get Hill on board until midnight on Friday night. We spent yesterday rushing round the ship, and I leave tomorrow morning, although they are apparently expecting me at the Admiralty today. I haven't quite understood what my job is to be, but I believe it's even more interesting than I first imagined, and the very job in the whole Admiralty which I'd prefer above all other. I'll be able to let you know in a day or two, I hope, but I doubt if I can tell you the whole truth. I was dined by the wardroom last night, and despite promises not to ruin the evening for me, I was made to make a speech. As usual, it was brief and thoroughly bad. The whole evening hasn't done my health any good, but I hope to recover in due course. I'm so glad the presents for the children have arrived safely. I do hope Jeremy's watch isn't damaged. They are terribly expensive things these days. Thank you so much for the English Saga by Arthur Bryant, very popular at the time. I haven't got to it yet, but I know I shall love it. I have all his other books that I've read. Despite his gloomy remarks about not doing a good job over the last few months, Kenneth must have been selling himself short, as Captain Miles's flimsy for the period 19th of July 1939 to the 23rd of December 1940 reads, "He has conducted himself very much to my satisfaction, an exceptionally able executive officer who shows initiative and foresight, a good disciplinarian. That he was not only professionally exceptional, but also popular with his juniors, is evidenced by a letter that the chaplain wrote to Molly some years later, the 12th of September 1943. I was the chaplain in Nelson and had the privilege of baptizing, I think it was Peter, whilst we were at Portsmouth. He was such a good friend to me in Nelson, and made such a difference to my work and general happiness the whole time he was there. She really was a good ship, and the ship's company knew how much they owed him. They gave him the most wonderful send-off an officer could have. After he left, he wrote me the most delightful letter, and I have still got it tucked away with my treasures. Stanley M. Epps." My brother was indeed baptized as Jonathan Peter. My own registered names were originally John Peter, later changed in pencil in my father's handwriting to John Jeremy, so clearly Peter was a favourite name, though neither of us was ever known as Peter. Another footnote: during my own naval service I met an officer, John Unsworth, first lieutenant of Fort Purbrook at the time, who had been a midshipman in Nelson in father's time, and he, discovering who my father was over lunch one day, quite spontaneously said that he was the best commander he had ever served under. A subordinate's praise is praise indeed.